My name is Mia. If you looked at my life through a series of Instagram photos, you'd probably think I had it all. A loving husband named Jack, a wonderful job, and a mother-in-law, Helen, who was an absolute gem. Picture perfect, right? Jack and I met during our college years. It was the kind of romance that you read about in novels, where you just know the two characters are destined for a happily ever after. He was an aspiring musician. I was studying computer science. Despite our differences, we had an inexplicable chemistry that made people around us a little jealous, perhaps. Our wedding was one for the storybooks. Picture a charming country estate, the air fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers, and soft golden light filtering through the trees. We wrote our own vows, and when Jack recited his, I couldn't help but think I was the luckiest woman alive. I vow to be your rock, your safe space, and the constant heartbeat that guides you through life, he said, his voice tinged with emotion. With you, I'm home, and I promise to make you feel the same every single day. I looked into his eyes and felt a sense of serenity wash over me. I vow to be your biggest supporter, your confidant, and your endless supply of love. With you, every day feels like an adventure, and I can't wait to see where this journey takes us. You could hear sniffles from the crowd, but all I could focus on was the man in front of me. It was sublime, magical, a moment suspended in time. Enter Helen, my mother-in-law, dressed in a sophisticated gown, emanating a sense of grace and wisdom. We had met several times before the wedding, of course, and each meeting only reinforced my belief that I was not just gaining a husband, but a whole new family. Helen was friendly, engaging, and seemed genuinely happy that her son had found someone he loved. Maya, you look absolutely stunning. Helen hugged me after the ceremony. Thank you, Helen, I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me. I couldn't be happier to be a part of this wonderful family. If there were warning signs, they were expertly concealed by the joy and euphoria of those early days. But there was one little detail, a shadow in an otherwise sunny landscape. Jack had this uncanny inability to say no to his mother. I remember once Helen casually mentioning how she disliked red in home decor, and Jack immediately discarded the new crimson cushions I'd picked for our living room. "Oh, Mom doesn't like red," he'd explained, as though it was the most natural thing in the world to exchange something from our home based on her preferences. "It's our house, Jack," I had reasoned, slightly puzzled. "Your mom doesn't have to live with those cushions. We do." "Yeah, I know," he'd said, scratching his head. "But if it makes her uncomfortable even for a minute, why keep it?" At the time, I'd shrugged it off. I told myself that it was a small thing and that his concern for his mother was an admirable quality. But if only I knew then what I know now, that this seemingly innocuous trait was a ticking time bomb that would eventually explode, ripping apart the fabric of our lives. And so, in that blissful haze of newlywed joy, surrounded by a seemingly loving husband and a welcoming mother-in-law, I was utterly unaware of the tempest that was brewing, ready to shatter my picture. Perfect life into a million irreparable pieces. To say that I was naive would be an understatement. I was blissfully ignorant, living in a fool's paradise. But as they say, what goes up must come down, and my fall from grace was just around the corner. Fast forward to a couple of years into our marriage, and things seemed to be going exceptionally well, at least on the surface. I had snagged a dream job at a tech company, rapidly climbing my way through the ranks. My days were filled with meetings, code reviews, and the exhilarating rush that came from solving complex problems. I was making a name for myself in the industry, and it felt incredible. Jack, however, was having a harder time finding his footing. He had tried his hand at various vocations, from marketing to real estate, but nothing seemed to stick. It was as if he was still searching for that one thing that would ignite the same kind of passion in him that my job did for me. It was around this time that Helen's visits became more frequent. She'd show up unannounced, armed with unsolicited advice for Jack on how to navigate his way through the choppy waters of the job market. And of course, Jack would listen attentively, hanging on to her every word as if it were gospel. "Might as well go into accounting, Jack," Helen suggested during one of her visits, her voice carrying a tone of finality. "Your Uncle Fred had a stable job in accounting for over 30 years. Stability is important." "But Mom, I've never been good with numbers. And it's just not what I want to do," Jack protested weakly, his eyes darting towards me as if seeking support. Helen shot him a disapproving look. Sometimes we don't get to do what we want, we do what we must. Think about Mia. She's doing so well because she's in a stable field. I remember feeling uncomfortable, caught in the middle of a family dynamic that I had not signed up for. Well, I think Jack should explore his options. Maybe something creative would be a better fit, I interjected cautiously, trying to offer a counterpoint without upsetting Helen. Helen merely scoffed. Creativity doesn't pay the bills, dear. Jack needs to think practically. Jack sighed and looked defeated. All right, Mom. I'll look into accounting courses. That should have been a red flag, a glaring neon sign screaming, danger ahead. But I chose to ignore it, attributing it to Jack's close family ties and perhaps a mother's natural instinct to want the best for her child. Little did I know that these frequent interventions were not benign. They were slowly but surely undermining the very foundation of our marriage. Every time Helen gave Jack a piece of career advice that he would obediently follow, I felt a tiny crack appear in the unity that a marriage was supposed to provide. And each crack, as small as it might have seemed at the time, was making way for a divide that would eventually become too wide to bridge. My husband was not partnering with me to make choices for our future. He was partnering with his mother. And that realization began to erode the confidence and happiness that had so far characterized our life together. It's a strange thing to be succeeding in one aspect of your life while watching another part crumble to pieces. My career was on the rise, but my marriage was on a slow but sure descent into a place I had never envisioned it would go. A place where my partner and I were not a team, but opponents on different sides of an ever-widening chasm, and it was a chasm that Helen was more than willing to exploit. Back then, I thought the situation was just a phase that would pass, a minor hiccup in our otherwise smooth journey together. But in retrospect, it was the beginning of a much larger, far more destructive pattern. A pattern that would, before long, lead us to a point of no return. Having worked tirelessly for the past couple of years, I decided it was time for a much-needed vacation. I'd been saving up, making smart investments, and finally had the funds to do something a bit extravagant. I found a breathtaking villa located on the coastline, one of those places you see in luxury travel magazines but never believe you'll set foot in. The villa had a market value of a whopping $1,500,000, but I managed to rent it for a week. It was to be a surprise, a much-needed oasis for Jack and me to rekindle the love that had been dulled by the stresses of daily life. The day I finalized the booking, I came home brimming with excitement. Helen was there, sitting on our couch, discussing something intently with Jack. Guess what? I've got some fabulous news, I announced, my face beaming with anticipation. Both of them looked up, and Helen mustered a smile that seemed a tad forced. Do tell, Maya. In a spontaneous turn of events, I've just rented us a villa worth $1,500,000 for a week-long vacation. Just imagine, Jack, you and me, ocean waves, stunning sunsets, no distractions. Jack's eyes widened, and he seemed genuinely thrilled. Wow, Mia, that's incredible! You really didn't have to do this, but thank you. It sounds like a dream. Here it comes, the $1,000,000 joke, a laugh that would cut through my joy like a knife through butter. Well, why not call it my new villa worth $1,500,000? I said, giggling at my own audacity. Helen's eyes flickered, and before I knew it, she was laughing too, only her laughter was devoid of humor. Oh, in that case, I'm moving into my new villa worth $1,500,000. I chuckled nervously, looking at Jack for some sort of support, thinking Helen was joking as well. But then Jack said something that turned my blood cold. Yeah, Mom, that sounds great. You should definitely join us. Excuse me. My eyes darted between Jack and Helen, trying to catch a hint of jest, a whisper of sarcasm. You're serious. My voice wavered as I said it. Absolutely, Helen interjected before Jack could say anything. It's high time I had a taste of luxury, don't you think? Jack seemed to fumble for words, aware of the tension but unable to side with me. Well, you know, Mom has a point, Maya. She's never experienced anything like this. It would be nice for her to join us. This was not a red flag anymore. It was a blazing inferno. My husband was willingly, openly prioritizing his mother's whims over the sanctity of our marriage. The villa was supposed to be our escape, our paradise, but it had suddenly morphed into a battleground where invisible but palpable lines were being drawn. As I stood there, shell-shocked, It became clear that my $1,000,000 joke had revealed the true price of my marriage. It was a price I wasn't willing to pay. Despite the betrayal and the feeling of utter disbelief that washed over me, I found myself, for the first time, looking at my situation with a new sense of clarity. This wasn't just about a villa or a vacation. It was about respect, boundaries, and the realization that the man I had married was willing to bulldoze over both at his mother's slightest whim. And as the weight of that realization settled in, so did a newfound resolve. If Helen wanted a taste of luxury, she'd get it, but not in the way she expected. The wheels began to turn in my head. I was done being the accommodating, understanding wife. It was time for action, and I already had a plan forming, a plan that would serve as the ultimate reality check for the people who thought they could rob me of my hard-earned happiness. As the saying goes, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. But as I would soon demonstrate, hell had no idea what was coming. A few days after that surreal conversation, the impossible happened. Helen arrived at the villa, not just for a quick tour or a day's visit, but with suitcases, boxes, and even some pieces of small furniture. She wasn't just planning to stay, she was planning to move in. "Good afternoon, Maya Jack. I hope I'm not intruding," she said as she waltzed into the villa, her tone dripping with folk innocence. "Mom, let me take those bags for you," Jack immediately offered, reaching for her luggage. I stood there, stunned at the audacity. My heart pounded as I watched my husband, yes, my husband, helping his mother unload boxes into a space that was meant to be our sanctuary. "Maya, could you please bring in those chairs from the car? We'll need extra seating," Helen directed, assuming a tone one would use with a hotel bellboy. For a moment, I thought of objecting, of setting things straight right there. But something stopped me. I decided to let this charade continue just a bit longer as I was formulating a plan of my own. "Sure, Helen. No problem," I responded, forcing a smile. As they started arranging the living room, Jack and Helen, the dynamic duo, I felt like a stranger in my own life. What was happening was beyond rude. It was a violation of the promises made and unspoken rules that build a marriage. It was time for a grocery run, and Helen, as usual, had a list ready. "Here you go, darling," she said, handing me a slip of paper. "We'll need these for dinner tonight. Would you mind going to the store?" I looked at Jack, who stood there sheepishly, not meeting my eye. "No, I think I'll stay and help Mom get settled," he said, finally looking up, but avoiding any prolonged eye contact. "All right," I said, reaching for my purse. "I'll be back soon." Helen smiled, a smile that had all the trappings of a victorious conqueror. "Take your time, dear. We have a lot to do here." As I left the villa, I couldn't shake off the feeling of betrayal. Jack, the man I vowed to spend the rest of my life with, was allowing this outrageous situation to unfold. I drove away, but not before discreetly grabbing the spare set of car keys from the drawer near the front door. As my car rolled down the driveway, I heard the sound that signaled the point of no return, the door slamming shut, followed by the unmistakable sound of a lock turning. They had locked me out. I couldn't believe it. The audacity, the sheer gall of it all. It was as if they had decided that the villa, my hard-earned slice of paradise, was theirs now, and I was merely an intruder who had been kindly escorted out. As I drove toward town, the impact of what had just occurred hit me like a ton of bricks, but there was no turning back now. My next steps were clear. I would not return to that villa, not yet. There were preparations to be made, documents to be drafted, and locks to be changed, yes, back at our original home. While Helen and Jack were playing house in a place they believed they had commandeered, they were completely unaware that their little empire was about to crumble. What they saw as their moment of triumph was, in fact, the beginning of their undoing. Little did they know that this audacious move would be their ultimate downfall, an act that would finally free me from the chains of their manipulation and control. With my grip tightening around the steering wheel, I headed straight to a lawyer's office. The time had come to turn the tables, and I was more than ready. I felt a sense of purpose as I parked my car in front of the lawyer's office. My steps were firm, my resolve unwavering. I knew that the path I was embarking on was difficult, but it was a path chosen out of necessity, not malice. The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, greeted me warmly but was immediately aware that this wasn't a casual visit. "Maya, what brings you here? You seem distressed," he said, noticing the urgency in my eyes. "I need to file for divorce. And I need to do it immediately. Time is of the essence, I responded, cutting straight to the point. His eyebrows rose, but he didn't question me further. Instead, he got straight to work, helping me draft the necessary documents and explaining the legalities involved. As I put pen to paper, signing the divorce papers, I felt both a sense of loss and liberation. What I was doing was irrevocable, but it was also a step towards reclaiming my life. Simultaneously, I also contacted a locksmith. I didn't want to take any chances, so I requested an immediate change of locks for my home, the actual one, not the villa. By the time I arrived back at my real home, the locksmith was already finishing up his work. He handed me the new set of keys, a physical embodiment of my reclaimed space. For the next 3 days, there was radio silence from both Jack and Helen. I wondered if they were too engrossed in the luxury of the villa to notice my prolonged absence, or if they were simply too wrapped up in their world to care. Either way, their silence spoke volumes. Finally, on the 4th day, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Helen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in me needed to hear what she had to say. I answered, bracing myself for her tirade. "Maya, where the hell are you? Why is the home locked? What's going on?" she spat out, her voice dripping with contempt and bewilderment. "Consider it an eviction, Helen. I suggest you find somewhere else to stay," I replied coldly, before hanging up. No more explanations. No more explanations. I was done. Not long after that, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find Jack standing there, looking frazzled and disheveled. "Maya, what is all this? My key isn't working and Mom said you kicked her out," he stammered. "Your mother was right," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Here are the divorce papers. I suggest you read them and sign." Jack looked like he'd been slapped. "You're divorcing me, but why? This is Mom's doing, not mine." "Oh, you're part of this, Jack. You let it happen. You sided with her over me, your wife, every single time," I countered. "Now, sign the papers." Looking defeated and maybe a bit scared, Jack picked a pen and signed the documents. "Is there anything else?" he asked, almost pleadingly. I took a deep breath. "Yes, actually. You and your mother can leave. We are no longer husband and wife. You've lost me, and you have yourselves to blame." As I closed the door behind him, the finality of it all washed over me. This was my checkmate moment. I had won this difficult game, not by playing dirty, but by reclaiming myself, worth and establishing boundaries that should have never been crossed in the first place. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my life. It was a bittersweet victory, for sure, but it was my victory. I was finally free from the manipulation, the deceit, and most importantly, free to start anew. With a newfound resolve, I stepped into my reclaimed life, ready to face whatever came next. The days following the divorce were a whirlwind. Jack and Helen moved out of the villa, which I still had a few days left on the lease for. I used that time to gather my thoughts, reminisce about what could have been, and plan for what would be. I didn't feel victorious in the traditional sense. It was more like I had managed to escape a sinking ship, and though I was safe, I was also alone in open water. I wasn't surprised when I started receiving messages from mutual friends and family, asking what had happened, offering their sympathies or judgments, and generally acting as if they were characters in a drama that they had no part in creating. It was in those moments that I understood the importance of what I had done. I had chosen myself, perhaps for the first time ever in my relationship with Jack. A week later, I was sipping coffee in my living room when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, half expecting it to be a courier or maybe a neighbor. Instead, it was Jack. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, Mia," he started cautiously. "You already have," I replied, holding the door ajar, not fully committing to letting him in. "May I come in? We need to talk." I considered it for a moment, then stepped aside. "Fine, but make it quick." He walked in, visibly uncomfortable, looking around the house as if seeing it for the first time. "You've changed the place." "No, Jack, the place didn't change. The people did," I corrected him, closing the door behind me. He sighed. "I came to apologize, Mia. What happened with the villa, with my mom? It wasn't right. I messed up." "It's too late for apologies, Jack. The papers are signed." "We're done," I said, maintaining my composure. "But, Maya, can't we try to mend things? Maybe go to couples therapy, start fresh?" I looked at him, seeing the same man I had fallen in love with, but also the man who had betrayed me, who allowed his mother to wedge herself into our marriage. No, Jack, we can't start fresh. A fresh start isn't erasing the past, it's learning from it, and I've learned enough to know that I deserve better, I declared, feeling a sense of finality. You're throwing away all our years together because of one mistake, he asked, disbelief clouding his face. One mistake? No, Jack, it wasn't one mistake. It was a series of choices you made, a pattern. You chose to let your mother interfere in our lives, and you chose to betray my trust. But I can change, he insisted. I hope you do, Jack. For your sake, and for the sake of anyone else you may share your life with. But as for us, we are irrevocably broken, I said, my voice tinged with regret, but also determination. Jack stood there, speechless, finally understanding the weight of his actions. All right, Maya. It is, I said, walking him to the door. As I watched him leave, I felt neither joy nor sorrow, just a sense of finality. I closed the door softly and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. I had said my final word, drawn my final line in the sand. What lay ahead was uncertain, but it was a future that I would navigate on my terms, unburdened by manipulation.